At first, Steve Davies didn't plan to speak. For years, he kept his mouth shut, honoring the code of silence that every royal protection officer lived by. He'd guarded prime ministers, billionaires, even monarchs. But nothing had ever left him more shaken than his time with Meghan Markle. He wasn't a man who believed in gossip, but as he put it, there's a difference between gossip and the truth no one wants to hear. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. And the truth, according to Steve, began with a single locked door. What if, he said in his first televised interview, the person you thought you knew best kept something so secret, so wrong, that even her husband wasn't allowed near it? He paused then, his voice low. And what if I told you it smelled like death? The audience fell silent. The reporter didn't speak. Cameras hummed softly. Somewhere, a clock ticked. Steve stared straight ahead, the weight of years pressing behind his eyes. At 67, he had nothing to gain and everything to lose. But maybe that was why he finally chose to talk. He had seen the door. He had smelled the stench. He had been warned, more than once, to leave it alone. But the moment he reached for the doorknob, he said, I knew something was alive in there, or had been. And that's where his story begins. Before we go deeper, it's important to understand who Steve Davies really is. To those inside the royal security network, his name carried weight. Decades of service, discreet and loyal, with commendations for handling volatile situations, from political protests to near assassination attempts. The man had seen it all. He was calm under pressure, the type who could face chaos and keep a steady pulse. So when Steve was handpicked in 2020 to join the Sussex's private security detail in California, no one questioned the decision. He was the kind of man who didn't talk, didn't judge, and didn't leak. Or at least, that's what everyone thought. He arrived in Montecito expecting a standard assignment: protect the Duke and Duchess, ensure their privacy, manage access, and maintain routine safety protocols. But what he found wasn't just a family seeking peace. It was a fortress of secrets. It wasn't protection they wanted, Steve said later. It was isolation. Control. Everything was locked, monitored, filtered. At first, it felt like any high-profile job. Staff turnover was high, but that wasn't unusual for celebrity households. People came and went. But soon, Steve began noticing patterns that didn't fit. The mansion had over 12 bedrooms, yet one particular wing was permanently off-limits. Meghan called it her creative space. No staff entered, no cleaners, no maintenance. Even Harry, Steve recalled, seemed hesitant to go near it. When questioned, Meghan would laugh lightly. Every woman needs a room of her own, she'd say. But that room, Room 7, as Steve nicknamed it, wasn't just private. It was forbidden. The first sign that something was off came one humid summer afternoon. The California sun burned bright through the estate's glass walls. But inside, Steve caught a faint odor in the hallway, a smell that didn't belong. He described it later as metallic, organic, like something rotting in the heat. He thought maybe an animal had gotten trapped in a vent. He noted it, prepared to call maintenance. But when he mentioned it to another guard, the man just shook his head. Don't bring it up, the guard whispered. Just don't. Steve laughed it off then, but curiosity doesn't die easily. Over the weeks, the odor came and went. Some days it was strong, others barely noticeable. But every time, it seemed to come from behind the same door, the one Meghan never let anyone near. When he asked about it casually one evening, Meghan's demeanor shifted instantly. Her smile froze. You don't need to concern yourself with that part of the house, she said in a tone so flat it could cut glass. Harry looked up from his phone, confused, but didn't speak. The air in the room thickened. Steve excused himself politely, but his instincts kicked in. Something wasn't right. He'd guarded people who hid many things: money, affairs, addictions, but never someone who guarded a smell. Over the next few weeks, Steve began paying closer attention. He noticed that deliveries arrived at odd hours. Crates marked personal, sometimes as late as 2 a.m. He saw Meghan sign for them herself, often dressed down, no makeup, and without the usual entourage. Once, he caught sight of a driver who seemed nervous, almost frightened. When Steve approached, the man muttered, "She said don't talk to anyone," before speeding off. Still, Steve said nothing. The job came first. But inside, his curiosity burned. What was in that room? Why did the odor grow stronger whenever Meghan was gone? Then came the day that changed everything. It was early evening, the kind of California dusk that painted the hills gold. Harry had left for a meeting, and Meghan was upstairs with her assistant. Steve was making his usual rounds when he heard a faint humming sound, like machinery or low static, coming from the restricted wing. He paused outside the locked door. The smell was heavier than ever, sharp and nauseating. Something inside him screamed to leave it alone. But then, he heard movement. A shuffle. A soft, dragging noise. He froze. For a second, he thought it might be an animal. But then came a sound that made his blood run cold. A low, muffled cough. Human. Weak. Barely audible. "Hello," he called quietly. No answer. Then, silence. He stepped back, his pulse pounding. He knew better than to act without orders. But his instincts, the same ones that had saved his life countless times, told him something was very, very wrong. He raised his hand to the handle. But before he could turn it, he heard footsteps behind him. It was Meghan. She was calm. Too calm. Her voice, low but sharp, cut through the hallway. "Don't ever go in there," she said. "That's not your concern." Steve apologized immediately, claiming he thought he'd heard a noise. She stared at him for a long moment, her face unreadable. Then she smiled faintly. "There are noises everywhere," she said. "Sometimes they're not real." He stepped aside. She walked past him, unlocked the door, and slipped inside. The smell hit like a wave. He turned his head, gagging. When she came back out, she locked the door again and pocketed the key. Her eyes were cold. "You didn't see anything," she whispered. After that night, Steve said the energy in the house changed. The staff avoided that wing altogether. Maintenance requests disappeared mysteriously from the system. A maid who accidentally mentioned the smell to Meghan was fired the next morning. Another guard resigned abruptly, claiming personal reasons. Steve stayed on, partly out of loyalty, partly out of fear, but mostly because he needed to know. "I couldn't walk away," he said. "Not until I understood what she was hiding." He started keeping notes. Times, noises, deliveries. Everything. He even managed to access part of the security feed one night, only to find that the camera facing the restricted hallway had been disabled. No record, he said, like that part of the house didn't exist. Then one morning, something happened that made him question everything. Meghan was away in Los Angeles, and Harry was in the garden with the dogs. The air inside the mansion was still, quiet. But that smell, stronger than ever, drifted down the hall. Steve approached cautiously, every step calculated. The door was locked, as always. But this time, something was different. Beneath the door, faint light flickered. He knelt, looking through the gap, and saw a movement. He never described what he saw in detail, at least not publicly. But the way he told it, whatever was in that room wasn't furniture. It moved wrong, he said. It wasn't an animal, but it wasn't human either. His voice cracked when he said it. For a man like Steve, disciplined, controlled, hardened by decades of service, that kind of reaction spoke volumes. He stepped back, shaken. Then he heard a sound that made his stomach twist, a voice whispering his name. He turned. The hallway was empty. When Meghan returned that evening, she acted as though nothing had happened. She laughed at dinner, posed for a photo shoot in the garden, and spoke sweetly to Harry. But Steve couldn't unhear that whisper. He couldn't shake the feeling that something, or someone, was inside that room. Why did no one else question it? Why did Harry seem so detached? As days turned to weeks, Steve began noticing the toll it took on everyone around her. Staff grew pale, nervous. Conversations stopped when Meghan entered a room. Harry, once vibrant, seemed distant, distracted. He spent more time away, as though trying to escape something he couldn't name. And through it all, that smell persisted, sweet and sour, sharp and decaying, like fruit left too long in the sun. One night, unable to sleep, Steve stood outside the locked door again. He pressed his palm to the cool wood. "What are you hiding?" he whispered. He thought he heard a faint knock from the other side. That's when he decided he couldn't stay silent anymore. But speaking meant risk. It meant breaking the code he'd lived by, and it meant facing people who would do anything to bury the truth. He took a breath, remembering that smell, that whisper, that door. And then he said the words that changed everything. If people knew what was behind that door, they'd never look at her the same way again. What was in that room? Why did Meghan guard it so fiercely? And why did Steve describe it as something that haunts him even now? Because what came next, what Steve finally saw, would turn a private mansion into a living nightmare. And no one, not even Harry, saw it coming. What drives a man to break a lifetime oath of silence? Was it guilt, fear, or something darker? Steve Davies didn't wake up one morning and decide to betray the code. He had seen things, lived through moments that gnawed at him when the world slept. You can't bury nightmares forever, and sometimes the truth refuses to stay locked away, just like that door. He remembered the night he left the Montecito estate for the last time. The moonlight hit the windows, and for a split second, he thought he saw movement behind the curtains, a shadow that shouldn't have been there. He'd sworn to forget, but the harder he tried, the louder the memories screamed. This is where his descent began. Steve's story didn't start with a scandal. It started with a man trying to do his job. After 3 decades of protecting high-value figures, politicians, oil executives, even a royal here and there, Steve thought he'd seen everything. He'd been shot at, lied to, praised, and forgotten. But Meghan Markle and Prince Harry were supposed to be different. They'd left the palace to live in peace, to raise their family away from the cameras. That's what the job brief said. He chuckled when he recalled that first meeting. "You'll find they're a bit unconventional," his supervisor had warned. Steve thought that meant they wanted fewer guards, more privacy. He didn't realize it meant working for people trapped between paranoia and performance. He arrived in Montecito just after dawn, greeted by the estate's head manager, a stiff man named Callum who looked like he hadn't slept in weeks. The house loomed in the distance, its pristine white walls glistening under the California sun. The mansion was beautiful, yes, but oddly silent. Even the birds seemed to keep their distance. "Rules are simple," Callum said flatly. "You'll report directly to Mrs. Markle, not Mr. Sussex. Cameras stay off the West Wing. No questions about the private suite." Steve had nodded, thinking it was standard privacy protocol. Celebrities always had boundaries. But as he toured the estate, he noticed something off. There were no security cameras in certain hallways, as if parts of the house didn't exist. The locks were custom, old-fashioned, not digital. He'd guarded palaces with infrared systems, but this mansion relied on a strange mix of luxury and secrecy. Then came his first encounter with Meghan. She swept into the room like she was stepping onto a movie set. Every movement rehearsed, every smile perfectly measured. "Mr. Davies, right?" she said, extending her hand. "I hear you're the best." He thanked her politely, and she smiled wider. "Good. Then you'll understand discretion. Privacy is our top priority here. No unnecessary wandering." Her tone was soft, but her eyes said something else entirely. "Don't cross me." Harry appeared moments later, casual and distracted, holding a mug of coffee. "Welcome, mate," he said with a grin. "Hope you're ready for some peace and quiet. It's different out here." Different. That was an understatement. From the very first week, Steve sensed tension between the couple. Meghan would give orders. Harry would nod, but rarely look her in the eye. Meals were eaten separately more often than not. Meghan spent hours locked in her creative suite, while Harry paced the garden or drove aimlessly around town. It wasn't the fairy tale the world believed. It was a house built on silence. One night, Steve overheard an argument between the two, muffled voices echoing from the upper floor. Harry's voice cracked with frustration. "You can't keep locking it, Meg. What's in there?" Her reply was cold, firm. "You don't need to know." Then the sound of something shattering. Silence followed. When Harry came down later, he avoided Steve's eyes. He simply muttered, "Long night," and went straight for the wine. The next morning, Meghan smiled as if nothing had happened. The staff whispered among themselves, but never for long. A maid named Rosa confided in Steve once during lunch. "There's something wrong here," she whispered, glancing toward the hallway. "At night, I hear." She stopped, shaking her head. "Never mind. Forget I said anything." By the following week, Rosa was gone. No notice. No goodbye. Just gone. Steve started paying attention to the pattern. Anyone who mentioned that room didn't last long. But he wasn't a gossip. He wasn't a fool either. He'd built a career on noticing details others ignored, and there were plenty. The deliveries at odd hours. The missing security footage. The smell that seemed to linger like a curse. He once saw Meghan personally checking a locked crate at the gate, signed only with an initial, M. No address. no return label. Inside, from what little he glimpsed, were metallic containers wrapped in plastic. Heavy. When he offered to carry them, she snapped. "No, I've got it." Her face softened instantly after. "Sorry, just fragile items. For storage." Fragile items that needed to be sealed and hidden. He tried to let it go, but when you've spent a lifetime protecting people, instinct becomes second nature. He knew when someone was lying. And Meghan's entire demeanor screamed control, not fear, not anxiety, but dominance. Like someone protecting a secret that could end everything. Harry, on the other hand, seemed lost. Some nights, he'd walk the grounds alone, muttering to himself. Once, Steve found him sitting on the patio at 2 a.m., staring into the darkness. "You ever wish you could just disappear, Steve?" Harry asked, his voice hollow. Steve didn't answer. Harry chuckled bitterly. "Yeah, me too." That night, Steve heard crying from the West Wing. It wasn't Meghan's voice. It was faint, trembling, like a child. He followed the sound quietly, heart pounding. The closer he got to the locked door, the clearer it became. Then, suddenly, silence. He pressed his ear to the wood. Nothing. Just that smell again. Heavy, suffocating, impossible to describe. He stepped back, his hands shaking. Maybe he was imagining things. Maybe it was a recording. Maybe. But the next morning, Meghan was radiant, cheerful, humming a tune as she watered the plants. Harry, however, looked pale. Steve caught his eye. "Everything all right, sir?" Harry hesitated, then nodded too quickly. "Fine. Just fine." It wasn't fine. As days passed, Steve began to notice Meghan's peculiar routines. Every evening, around 9 p.m., she'd vanish into the locked room and emerge precisely 2 hours later. Her hair would be slightly disheveled, her skin glistening with sweat. Sometimes she wore gloves. Always, she carried a small, sealed jar, and always, she took it straight to the basement freezer. He asked the housekeeper about the freezer once. She looked terrified. "We don't touch it," she whispered. She said it's medical. For preservation. Preservation of what? Steve's mind raced. There were whispers of surrogacy controversies, rumors that the royal children were not seen often, claims that photos were staged. But Steve wasn't one for tabloids. He dealt in reality. And the reality before him was that something about that mansion defied logic. He tried to file a routine report to his security coordinator in London, omitting names but hinting at irregularities. 2 days later, he received a call from an unknown number. "Mr. Davies," the voice said calmly, "we advise you to refrain from submitting any more reports about the Sussex residence. Some things are better left unspoken." Then the line went dead. That was the first time Steve truly felt fear. Not for his job, for his life. Still, curiosity doesn't die easily. He began documenting everything privately. Voice notes, photos, timestamps. He hid them in an encrypted USB drive. "If something happens to me," he told a friend, "it's all on there." But nothing prepared him for what came next. One late afternoon, Meghan asked him to accompany her to a charity event in Los Angeles. Harry wasn't going. Too tired, she'd said. Before they left, she gave very specific instructions. "No one goes upstairs while I'm gone. No cleaning. No maintenance. No exceptions." Steve nodded, pretending not to notice the flicker of panic behind her composed exterior. Hours later, as the car sped down the highway, he couldn't shake the thought. Why would someone forbid access to a simple room in their own house? When they returned close to midnight, Meghan seemed anxious. She rushed inside before anyone could follow. Moments later, the smell hit again, stronger than ever. Even the driver gagged. "What the hell is that?" he muttered. Steve didn't answer. He watched as Meghan disappeared up the stairs, locking the door behind her. That night, the entire house creaked. At 3:14 a.m., the security alarm blipped for just 1 second, then reset. Steve checked the cameras. Every feed worked except one, the West Wing. Static. He tapped the monitor. The image flickered briefly, revealing movement, a flash of white, something shifting past the door, before the screen went black again. He stared, frozen. The system rebooted automatically, but the footage was gone. Erased. And then, he heard it again. A cough. Faint, desperate, human. He rose from his chair, every instinct screaming not to move, but his legs carried him toward the hallway anyway. The sound echoed softly, fading in and out, leading him straight to the door. He stood there, trembling, hand hovering over the knob. What would you have done? Would you open it, knowing what might be waiting on the other side? Or would you walk away, pretend ignorance, and live with the questions forever? Steve took a deep breath. He turned the handle. It didn't budge. Locked tight. He pressed his ear to the wood again, and for the briefest moment, he swore he heard breathing. Not fast. Slow. Labored. Alive. He stepped back, heart racing. But before he could react, the hallway light flickered. Once. Twice. Out. You ever walk into a house and feel like the walls are listening? Like every sound, every breath, carries somewhere unseen? That was how Steve described the Montecito mansion. Beautiful on the surface, but the silence underneath felt alive. He'd been in palaces, castles, even royal bunkers, but this one was different. It didn't feel lived in. It felt watched. From the outside, the Sussex home was a dream. Acres of manicured gardens, koi ponds, endless fountains. The kind of place where serenity was supposed to live. But behind the white stone facade, Steve said, it was a house where people walked quietly because they were afraid to be heard. When he first started working there, he didn't think much of the atmosphere. High-security estates always felt tense. But as the days went on, he began noticing how unnatural that tension was. Conversations stopped the moment Meghan appeared. Laughter evaporated. Even Harry, cheerful, friendly Harry, turned into a shadow of himself when she was near. And then there was that West Wing. You couldn't even mistake it for a normal hallway. The energy shifted the moment you stepped in. The air felt heavy, damp. The temperature dropped by several degrees, as if sunlight avoided that side of the house. Meghan had ordered the lights replaced with dim amber bulbs, claiming it was for aesthetic reasons. But when Steve walked past them at night, they flickered, like they didn't want to stay on. The staff called it the quiet wing. Not out loud, though. Only in whispers. One afternoon, Steve caught the head cleaner, a young woman named Sophia, lingering near the west corridor. She looked pale, eyes wide. "Do you hear that?" she whispered. He listened. Nothing. She shook her head. "Never mind. I thought I heard." She trailed off, backing away quickly. That evening, her locker was emptied. She never came back. Steve didn't need a manual to recognize a pattern of fear. He'd seen it before, in embassies hiding corruption, in private compounds that looked perfect on paper but rotted inside. A secret always creates a gravity field around it. Everyone can feel it, even if they can't explain it. He started mapping the house in his head. The West Wing wasn't on any of the blueprints he'd received. Oh, it existed physically, but the digital schematics skipped it completely, just a blank space, as if the area had been redacted. When he asked Callum, the manager, for updated plans, the man stiffened. "Those rooms are personal," he said. "You don't need them." Personal? In a 14-bedroom estate? It wasn't long before Steve realized he wasn't just protecting the couple. He was being kept out. One night, while reviewing the nightly patrol log, he noticed something strange. A cleaning schedule listed for 3 a.m., but no staff had signed in. The entry simply read, "Private sanitation. Do not interfere." That same night, he was making rounds near the garden when he saw a faint light through the West Wing window. A single bulb flickering. A silhouette moved inside, tall, deliberate. It wasn't Meghan's shape, nor Harry's. The figure paused at the curtain, as if aware of him, then slowly stepped back into the darkness. He radioed another guard to confirm who was inside. The reply came minutes later. No one's supposed to be there. Steve's heart thudded. He turned to head toward the west entrance, but the light clicked off. The smell hit next. That same sickly sweet odor, heavy and humid, cutting through the night air. You ever smell something that makes your brain scream before you even identify it? That was it. He'd smelled decomposing bodies before. Old cases, accidents, war zones. This was close, but not quite. It had that same sour tang, but something chemical underneath, something artificial trying to cover it. He could almost taste it. When he mentioned it at breakfast the next day, the chef froze mid-motion. "You smelled it too?" he whispered before catching himself. "Never mind. Forget I said that. Forget I said that." Those words became a mantra around the house. Still, Steve's curiosity wouldn't rest. He began checking the wing's temperature logs. Every other section of the house stayed at a steady 22 degrees Celsius. The West Wing? A constant 17 degrees Celsius. Refrigerated, almost. He didn't say a word. but he noted it all in his private log. The strange part? Deliveries increased whenever Meghan was away on public trips. Packages marked fragile, medical, or simply private. All signed for by one person, a new assistant, barely 20, who seemed terrified of her employer. He asked her once, gently, what those deliveries were. Her voice trembled. "They're samples," she said. "Samples of what?" he asked. She looked up, eyes glistening. "I don't know. Please don't ask me again." That same week, the assistant stopped showing up. The mansion's energy grew darker. Harry withdrew further. Meghan's behavior, once charming and calculated, grew erratic. She laughed at nothing, snapped over trivial mistakes. Sometimes she disappeared into that wing for entire nights, coming out with trembling hands. And every time, the smell would follow. Steve started to notice the smaller details too. Meghan forbade certain cleaning supplies in that area. Too strong, she claimed. She'd personally change the air fresheners every morning. Once, when a new gardener used bleach near the west patio, she erupted in fury. "Do you want to ruin everything?" she shouted before firing him on the spot. Ruin what? The word echoed in Steve's mind for days. He wasn't a man prone to superstition, but by now, the house had taken on a kind of haunted rhythm. Lights flickered in patterns. Doors creaked open and closed when no one was near. The dogs refused to go near the west wing. They'd growl, bark, or whimper, their fur bristling. Meghan claimed they were reacting to pests. But Steve knew animals sensed things people tried to ignore. One evening, he was on his way to the security room when he saw Harry standing by the French doors, staring at the west corridor. His face was pale, his jaw tight. Steve stopped beside him. "Sir." Harry didn't look at him. "You ever feel like you married a stranger?" Steve hesitated. "Sometimes people change, sir." Harry let out a hollow laugh. "Or they show you who they really are." That was the closest he ever came to admitting fear. After that, Harry became distant. He stopped asking questions, stopped going upstairs. If the West Wing was a forbidden world, Harry had decided he didn't want to enter it. "She has her space," he said once when Steve tried to check the locks. "I have mine." But that wasn't normal marriage space. That was avoidance. Fear disguised as respect. The isolation began to wear on everyone. Staff rotated in and out like ghosts. Every new hire lasted shorter than the last. Steve, somehow, stayed longest. Maybe it was stubbornness. Maybe something inside him couldn't walk away until he knew the truth. And then came the night everything shifted. It started like any other, quiet, eerie. The smell had been unusually faint that week, almost gone. Meghan was in LA for an interview. Harry in London for a charity event. Steve was alone on night patrol. The mansion slept under a heavy sky. Around 1:30 a.m., the security system pinged, motion detected in the West Wing. He frowned. No one was supposed to be there. He checked the feed. Static. Just like before. He grabbed a flashlight and made his way down the corridor. Each step echoed like thunder. The temperature dropped. The air grew thicker, almost wet. He reached the door, still locked. The smell, faint but unmistakable, crept through the seams. Then a sound. A faint, dragging scrape. He leaned closer. "Hello." Silence. Then another scrape, softer this time, followed by a weak thud, like something falling over. Steve's pulse roared in his ears. He tried the handle again. Still locked. He pressed his palm flat against the door, cold. He leaned in, and then froze. A voice whispered from the other side. "Help me." 2 words. Fragile, trembling, unmistakably human. Steve staggered back. "Who's in there?" No reply. Just the faint rustle of movement. He didn't imagine it. He couldn't have. Every hair on his arm stood on end. He reached for his radio. No signal. He turned to go find Callum, but when he looked back, the door was slightly ajar. Just enough for a sliver of darkness to spill out. The smell hit him full force this time. A choking, sickly sweet odor that made his stomach lurch. He clamped his hand over his mouth, stepping closer, pushing the door open another inch. And then, just as he was about to shine his light inside, something slammed it shut from the other side. He stumbled backward, heart racing. When he returned moments later with another guard, the door was locked tight again. The light inside was gone. The smell lingered. Callum arrived, furious. "You were told never to go near that area," he hissed. "Do you want to lose your job?" Steve protested. "Someone's in there. I heard them." Callum's face went pale, then darkened. You didn't hear anything, he said quietly. And if you value your life, you'll stop saying otherwise. Steve froze. My life. Just leave it alone, Callum muttered before walking away. But how do you leave something like that alone? He couldn't sleep that night. He kept replaying the voice in his head. The sound. The smell. The door closing on its own. What if someone really was trapped in there? What if this was bigger than any of them realized? He didn't know it yet, but that single night was the beginning of his unraveling. Because once you open one locked door, even a little, you start to see how many more there are. And in that house, secrets didn't stay hidden. They multiplied. But what Steve found next would make the locked room seem almost innocent. Because when he finally uncovered the truth about those late-night deliveries and the crates marked medical, he realized the mansion wasn't just hiding something. It was feeding it. The first thing that hits you is the smell. Before fear, before curiosity, before thought itself, comes the smell. Sweet at first, almost floral, then sour and metallic, clinging to the back of your throat like something that shouldn't exist in a home. Steve Davies would never forget it. It wasn't just bad, he said years later. It was wrong. It smelled like something that shouldn't be alive, but wasn't completely dead either. He tried for weeks to rationalize it. Plumbing. Mold. Maybe an animal had died inside a wall. But deep down, Steve knew better. He'd learned to trust his instincts, and every instinct in his body told him this was something different. He first noticed it intensify one afternoon while Meghan was in Los Angeles filming. The staff was thinner that day, fewer eyes, fewer ears. He was walking past the West Corridor when he caught it again, stronger than ever, thick and humid. It made his eyes water. He covered his nose, following the invisible trail until it led him right to that familiar door. It was shut, locked as always. The lights in the hallway flickered, as if warning him away. Still, he stood there, transfixed. There was something rhythmic on the other side, a slow, pulsing sound. Not mechanical, organic. His training told him to walk away. But his gut whispered, open it. He reached for the knob. Ice cold, like touching metal pulled from a freezer. And just as his hand brushed it, he heard it again. That sound. Faint breathing. Slow. Uneven. He froze, heartbeat hammering. For a long second, he couldn't tell if it was coming from the room or from his own chest. Then, a creak. Wood shifting under pressure. The smell grew stronger, overwhelming. And then, silence. He stepped back, eyes stinging. Something about that silence scared him more than the noise. Later that evening, when Meghan returned, she noticed him immediately. You've been near it, haven't you? She said softly, almost playfully. He hesitated. Near what, ma'am? Her lips curled into a smile that didn't reach her eyes. That room. You think I don't notice when someone snoops? I was checking air quality, ma'am, he said carefully. There's a smell coming through the vents. Her smile widened. There's no smell. He opened his mouth, but she stepped closer, too close. He could see her pupils dilate slightly. If you think you smell something, she whispered, then perhaps you've been breathing the wrong air. He didn't respond. He couldn't. She turned away, humming as she ascended the staircase, the click of her heels echoing through the empty house. That night, the smell seeped into his dreams. He dreamed of a door that opened endlessly, revealing nothing but shadows and whispering voices. When he woke, his throat was raw, his sheets damp with sweat. But the real nightmare began the next morning. He came downstairs to find the gardener vomiting near the patio. The smell, the man gasped. It's everywhere today. Steve followed him back inside, and it was. The entire West Wing was drenched in it. The air conditioning system was running at full blast, but it didn't help. Instead, it spread the odor through the vents, filling the house with that sickly sweetness. By noon, Meghan was furious. Turn off the entire HVAC system, she demanded. Immediately. But ma'am, Callum protested, the heat. Do it, she snapped. Within an hour, the air went still, heavy. The smell didn't disappear. It settled, like fog that refused to lift. Steve tried again to convince her something was wrong. We might have a decomposing animal in the ductwork. I can call someone. Her glare silenced him. No one comes into this house unless I say so. Then she leaned in, her voice low, controlled. And if you value your job, Mr. Davies, you'll stop asking questions about smells and doors. Her tone wasn't angry. It was calm, the kind of calm that hides a blade underneath. For a few days, Steve backed off. But his mind wouldn't rest. That odor haunted him like a living thing. It clung to his clothes, his hands, even his hair. Every time he washed, he could still catch it faintly. Then one night, something changed. Harry had gone to London. Meghan stayed behind. Around 11 p.m., Steve was reviewing exterior camera feeds when he caught something strange. The west corridor light, usually dim, flickered on, then off, then on again. He zoomed in. Nothing, but a faint shadow moved past the bottom of the frame. Then, the smell. It drifted through the air conditioning vents, even though the system was supposedly off. His eyes watered instantly. He covered his mouth and nose, trying to breathe shallowly. He grabbed his flashlight and went toward the source. The closer he got, the worse it became. By the time he reached the door, he felt dizzy. He leaned against the wall for balance. The light inside was on again, seeping faintly under the crack. He whispered to himself, "What the hell is in there?" As he reached for the doorknob, footsteps echoed behind him. "Looking for something, Steve?" It was Meghan. He turned slowly. She was barefoot, wearing a silk robe, her face half lit by the hallway bulb. Her expression was unreadable. "I thought I heard something, ma'am," he said, trying to steady his voice. From inside. "You heard something," she repeated, tilting her head. "And what did it say?" He frowned. It didn't say anything. It just moved. She stepped closer until they were inches apart. Her perfume, floral, expensive, mixed horribly with the stench seeping from the door. "Do you believe everything you hear, Mr. Davies?" "I believe what I see," he said quietly. Her eyes flashed. "Then maybe it's time you stop seeing." Without another word, she turned, unlocked the door, and slipped inside. He caught only a glimpse, a rush of hot air, the smell hitting like a slap, and a flicker of something white under a shroud. Then the door slammed shut. Moments later, she emerged again, calm, composed. She locked it behind her and pocketed the key. "Good night, Mr. Davies," she said softly. He didn't sleep at all that night. The next morning, he checked the cameras again. The footage from the previous night? Gone. The system log showed manual deletion, user unknown. Someone had erased it. And yet, Meghan acted as though nothing happened. She laughed with the staff, played with the dogs, even greeted him warmly. "Feeling better today?" she asked, almost cheerfully. "Yes, ma'am." "Good. I'd hate for anyone to think this house wasn't a pleasant place to work." That afternoon, she received another delivery. 3 large metal containers marked temperature sensitive. She signed for them herself and ordered everyone away from the entrance. Steve watched from a distance. The delivery driver looked nervous, refusing to meet anyone's eyes. After the truck pulled away, Meghan wheeled the containers herself toward the west corridor. No one offered to help. No one dared. That evening, the smell returned stronger than ever. Steve began coughing uncontrollably in his quarters. His eyes burned. When he stepped outside for air, he saw Meghan on the balcony, staring down at him, motionless. She didn't blink. He went back inside. His chest tightened. His instincts screamed at him to leave. But something stronger, curiosity, obsession, kept him there. He needed to know. The next morning, a new gardener arrived. Young, eager, unaware. He asked Steve about the smell within his first hour. Steve just said, "Don't ask." By lunch, the gardener was gone. Later that day, Steve found a note slipped under his door. The handwriting was shaky, rushed. "She knows you heard it. Stop before it's too late." There was no signature. That night, he made a decision. If he couldn't open the door, he'd find another way in. He checked the house schematics again, the real ones this time. He cross-referenced blueprints from county records. The West Wing layout didn't match the original design. Behind that locked room was a small annex, a windowless space, roughly 10 feet wide. A dead zone. No vents. No exits. He'd seen enough secret compartments in his career to know what that meant. A hidden chamber. And if there was a chamber, there had to be another access point. He waited until Meghan left for another event. The staff was minimal. He slipped down the hall quietly, flashlight in hand. He examined the wall adjacent to the door, running his fingers over the seams, the paint. Then he heard it again. That faint pulsing sound. He pressed his ear to the wall. The smell was overpowering now, seeping through invisible cracks. And then, faintly, unmistakably, a sound that made his blood freeze, sobbing. Soft. Human. Desperate. He stumbled backward, heart racing. Someone was in there. He didn't know who. He didn't know why. But he knew one thing. It wasn't an animal. It wasn't mechanical. It was a person. He took a step toward the door, and the light bulb above him exploded. Glass showered across the floor. He ducked instinctively, heart hammering. When he looked up again, the hall was pitch black. In that silence, a single word floated from the darkness beyond the door. Please. He ran. That night, he packed a small bag, ready to leave for good. But as he reached the driveway, a car he didn't recognize blocked the gate. Two men stepped out, plain clothes, unmarked vehicle. One of them approached, expressionless. "You're Mr. Davies?" "Yes." "You've been working for the Duchess?" "Yes." The man nodded slowly. "Then I'd advise you to stop asking questions. People who ask too many tend to disappear." He turned and got back in the car. The engine roared to life. They drove off into the night. Have you ever watched someone's mask slip? Not slowly, but in one horrifying instant? That's what Steve remembered most about that night. The moment when the polished, camera-perfect Meghan vanished, replaced by something else entirely. Something raw, unfiltered, and frighteningly real. It began quietly. The kind of quiet that makes your spine itch. The Montecito air was heavy that night, the ocean breeze eerily still. The estate lights shimmered across the marble floors, but the house itself felt tense, like it was holding its breath. Steve had been awake for nearly 20 hours, reviewing reports. He was in the security room when the first sound came, a crash from upstairs. He froze, glancing at the camera feeds. Static flickered across half the monitors. The West Wing feed, as always, was black. Another sound followed. Shouting. A woman's voice. He muted the intercom to listen. The words were muffled, but he caught fragments. "You don't understand." Meghan screamed. "You'll ruin everything." A male voice followed, lower, desperate. "Harry." "Meg, stop, please." Then another crash. The sound of glass shattering. Steve bolted up, rushing toward the staircase. He found Harry halfway down, barefoot, pale, clutching his arm where blood trickled through his fingers. "Don't go up there," Harry muttered, voice shaking. "She's not herself." "What happened?" Steve asked. Harry looked at him blankly. "I don't know who she is anymore." Before Steve could respond, Meghan appeared at the top of the stairs. Her hair was wild, her face flushed, eyes glossy and unfocused. She looked almost feral. "Everyone out," she screamed. "Out of my house." Her voice echoed down the hall like a whip crack. Harry took a step forward. "Meg, please." She turned on him with such fury that even Steve felt it. "Don't you dare. You think I don't know what you've been doing? You think I don't see?" Harry raised his hands defensively. "Meg, no one's against you." "No one," she hissed. "They're everywhere. Watching. Listening." She pointed directly at Steve. "Even him." Steve stayed calm, his training kicking in. "Ma'am, let's step outside. Get some air." "Don't talk to me like I'm one of your suspects," she spat. "You're all the same, waiting for me to fall." Her words slurred slightly, not from drink, but exhaustion. Maybe something else. The intensity in her eyes was unbearable. Harry tried again, softer this time. "Meg, it's just us. No one's watching." She laughed, a sound so sharp it made the hair on Steve's neck rise. "They're always watching, even in there." Her gaze darted toward the west corridor. Steve's stomach tightened. "What's in there, ma'am?" he asked carefully. Her face went cold. "Don't you start. I just want to help." "Help?" she snapped. "You want to help? Then forget what you saw. Forget what you heard." She took a step toward him. "If you open that door again, I swear you'll regret it." Her tone was low now, almost whispering, but far more dangerous than her shouting. Then, as if on cue, the smell hit again, sudden, thick, choking. Even Harry gagged. "What is that?" he coughed, covering his mouth. Meghan's expression shifted instantly, from rage to terror. "You weren't supposed to smell it," she murmured. Steve took a cautious step back. "We need to get you outside, ma'am. The ventilation." But she wasn't listening. She turned and bolted toward the West Wing. "Ma'am," Steve called, chasing after her. Harry followed close behind, limping slightly. "Meg, don't go in there." She reached the door, fumbling with the keys. Her hands shook violently. When she finally managed to unlock it, the stench that poured out was unbearable, a mix of decay, disinfectant, and something metallic. Steve gagged, covering his face with his sleeve. Dear God. Inside, the lights flickered weakly. The room beyond was barely visible. Shapes under sheets, stainless steel trays, what looked like sealed glass containers along the wall. "Ma'am, please," Steve said firmly. "Step away." But Meghan wasn't listening. She turned toward him slowly, her face illuminated by the pale light. "You think I don't know what you all say about me?" she whispered. "You think I don't hear it? The whispers? The names? No one's judging you," Steve said softly. She laughed bitterly. "Liar." Her hand trembled as she picked up one of the containers from the table. It was small, metal, with condensation forming on its surface. "You want to see what's inside, don't you?" Steve froze. "Don't," Harry said weakly. "Meg, please don't." But she twisted the lid open anyway. The smell intensified instantly, so vile that Harry staggered backward. Steve's stomach lurched as the air seemed to curdle. Inside the container, something floated in a pale, viscous fluid, small, unidentifiable, but clearly organic. Steve turned away instinctively. Meghan slammed the lid shut, breathing hard. "Do you see? This is what they made me do." Her voice cracked. Tears filled her eyes, but not sadness, something else. Anger. Desperation. "Meg, please," Harry whispered, stepping forward. She turned on him, eyes wild. "You weren't supposed to see that." He stopped, hands raised. Okay, I didn't see anything." She dropped the container onto the floor. It rolled across the tiles, stopping at Steve's feet. The liquid inside sloshed faintly. He didn't look down. Then, without another word, Meghan turned and walked out of the room. Her breathing was heavy, her steps uneven. Harry followed a few paces behind, silent, defeated. Steve stood there for a moment, frozen, heart pounding. The room was deathly still except for the faint hum of a generator somewhere beneath the floor. The air felt charged, electric. He stepped closer to the table, the sheets covering the shapes. They weren't furniture. He could see outlines beneath them, uneven, bulky, human-like. He didn't dare lift the covers. He backed out slowly, pulling the door shut behind him. The latch clicked softly. Outside, Meghan was on the staircase again, sitting on the steps with her head in her hands. Harry crouched beside her, murmuring something Steve couldn't hear. She looked up briefly, eyes glassy. "It's not what you think," she said hoarsely. Steve didn't answer. He couldn't. That night, Harry asked him to stay silent. "She's under a lot of pressure," he said weakly. "Don't tell anyone what you saw." Steve nodded. But he knew what he saw. He knew what he smelled. And he knew that whatever Meghan was hiding in that room, it wasn't stress. The next morning, Meghan acted as if nothing had happened. Dressed immaculately. Smiled. Gave interviews from her office. But the staff noticed the change. The smell was gone, completely gone. For the first time in months, the air felt clean. Until midnight. Steve woke to a faint sound. The hum of machinery, the click of metal against tile. He grabbed his flashlight, heading quietly toward the west corridor. The smell had returned, faint but unmistakable. The door was closed again. Locked. He crouched, listening. No voices this time. Just the rhythmic pulse of the generator and something dripping, a slow, steady pattern. Then he noticed something that made his blood run cold. There were footprints. Bare footprints. Leading away from the door. They stopped halfway down the hall. And there was no trace of them beyond that. He looked around. The house was silent. The next morning, Meghan was gone. No note. No message. Her car still in the garage. Her phone left on the counter. Harry sat alone in the kitchen, staring at a cup of cold tea. "She's done this before," he murmured. "She always comes back." But something in his eyes told Steve he didn't believe it. For 3 days, the mansion was quiet. Then, just as suddenly, she returned, radiant, smiling, as if nothing had happened. "Miss me?" she laughed. No one dared answer. And when Steve walked past the west corridor that night, the smell was back, stronger than ever. He realized then that whatever had happened in that room wasn't over. It had just begun, because Meghan didn't lose control that night. She found it, and what she did with it next would leave even Harry terrified to sleep under the same roof. There's a kind of silence that doesn't mean peace. It's the kind that screams inside your head. The kind that hides under polite smiles and morning tea. After that night, the one where Meghan's mask cracked and Steve saw the truth behind that door, silence became the loudest sound in the Montecito mansion. Harry didn't speak of it. Not to Steve. Not to anyone. He moved like a ghost through the halls. Always present, never alive. At first, Steve thought it was shock. But then he realized it wasn't shock. It was surrender. The man who once joked with guards, the one who'd sneak out to grab a burger or crack a pint with staff, was gone. In his place stood someone hollowed out, a man tiptoeing through his own life. One morning, Steve found Harry sitting alone in the garden, the dogs lying silently beside him. The sun was climbing, warm and golden, but Harry didn't look up. His eyes were red, heavy. Steve approached carefully. "Everything all right, sir?" Harry didn't answer at first. He just stared at the grass. Then he said quietly, "Do you think some people are born to keep secrets, Steve?" Steve hesitated. "Depends on the secret, sir." Harry chuckled, a low, bitter sound. "Yeah, depends." He looked up then, his expression cracked with exhaustion. "Sometimes I think she doesn't even see me anymore. Just what I represent. A name. A memory she wants to rewrite." Steve didn't know how to respond. Harry leaned back, sighing. "But it's not her fault, is it? It's what they did to her. The press. The firm. They made her this way." There it was, that word. The justification. The excuse. The beginning of his silence. Because denial isn't always a lie. Sometimes it's the only way to stay sane. Steve nodded, not agreeing, but not contradicting either. "You can't protect someone by pretending, sir." Harry's gaze hardened. "And you can't save someone by exposing them." He stood, brushing off his jacket. "Let it go, Steve. Whatever you think you saw, you didn't." Steve wanted to argue, to remind him of the smell, the room, the bare footprints that led nowhere. But the look in Harry's eyes stopped him. It wasn't anger. It was fear. Harry didn't want to know. He couldn't. From that day on, Meghan's name became a kind of taboo. The West Corridor, off limits again. Harry spent his days in the study or garden, avoiding her entirely. When she passed by, he smiled faintly but never spoke. They moved around each other like two actors in different plays, rehearsing lines no one believed. Steve started noticing new patterns. Harry slept on the couch in his study most nights. When Meghan entertained guests, which was rare, he stayed upstairs, out of sight. And when deliveries arrived, always at odd hours, he didn't ask questions. He just turned the music louder. One night, Steve found him there again, staring at the same untouched drink. "You ever wonder," Harry said without looking up, "what would happen if you walked away and never looked back?" Steve hesitated. "I have, sir. And I always turn back." Harry smiled faintly. "That's the problem, isn't it? We always do." He drained his glass and muttered, "She'd never let me go, you know." Not really. That same night, Steve saw Meghan slip out the back door. No security detail, no driver. Just her in a small metal case. She disappeared into the night. When she returned hours later, her clothes were spotless, but her hands were trembling. She went straight to the West Corridor. The smell returned by morning. Steve watched Harry at breakfast. The Duke pushed his food around the plate, expression blank. "You were awake last night, sir?" Steve asked carefully. Harry nodded slowly. "I heard her leave." "You didn't stop her?" He shook his head. "She doesn't like being followed. She could be in danger." Harry looked up sharply. "Or maybe she is the danger." The words hung in the air. He set his fork down and added softly, "Either way, I can't stop her. I've tried." After that, he never mentioned her night trips again. He didn't ask where she went or what she brought back. He didn't ask why the smell grew stronger every time she returned. He simply turned away, buried himself in routine, and learned to pretend. Steve began to understand then that silence wasn't cowardice. It was survival. Everyone in that house learned to survive it. But silence has consequences. It eats at you. And soon, it began eating at Harry. He grew thinner, paler. He'd sit by the window for hours, just staring. One afternoon, Steve found him watching the West Corridor again, expression unreadable. "You know," Harry said suddenly, "she told me once that everyone has a locked room. Something they never let anyone see." Steve nodded. "We all have secrets." "Not like hers," Harry whispered. "Hers breathes." He looked away quickly, as if regretting the words. That night, Steve heard voices from the West Wing again. Two this time. Meghan's and Harry's. "You said you'd trust me," she snapped. "I'm trying." "Trying isn't enough. You always question me." "You scare me, Meg." Silence. Then a sound like a slap. Steve froze at the base of the stairs. He didn't move. The voices went quiet. Then came sobbing, not hers. His. When the house fell silent again, Steve crept away. He wanted to leave, to quit, to run. But something inside him wouldn't let go. The next morning, Harry's cheek was red. He covered it with his hand when Steve entered. "Rough night?" Steve asked gently. Harry forced a smile. "We just misunderstand each other sometimes." "Is that what you call it?" Harry's smile faded. "You don't understand. You never will." He left the room, and Steve heard the lock click behind him. After that, Harry's world shrank. He stopped attending public events. Calls went unanswered. Even his friends from the UK stopped visiting. Meghan said he needed time for reflection. But Steve could see the truth. The man was fading. And then, one night, Harry came to him. It was nearly 2 a.m. The house was quiet, the moonlight spilling through the glass windows. Harry stood in the doorway of the security room, eyes haunted. "Steve," he said softly, "if something ever happens to me, promise me you'll tell the truth." Steve blinked. "About what, sir?" Harry hesitated. "About her. About the room. About everything." He turned to leave, but Steve stopped him. "Why not leave now? You have resources. You could walk away." Harry looked back, a bitter smile on his face. "You don't walk away from her. You orbit her." Then he whispered something Steve never forgot. "She said if I open that door again, it'll be the last thing I ever do." He walked away, and Steve never saw him sleep again. From that moment on, Harry's silence wasn't just fear, it was agreement. A quiet pact between love and terror, between truth and denial. Steve realized that whatever was in that locked room wasn't just Meghan's secret anymore. It was their prison, and soon it would become his. Because just when he thought he'd reached the edge of the mystery, when the silence became unbearable, something inside the walls started to make noise again. Soft at first, then louder. And this time, it wasn't Meghan's voice he heard. It started as a whisper, not the kind that drifts through air vents or echoes from a television left on mute. This one was different. It was intentional, deliberate. It carried rhythm, emotion, fear. The kind of whisper that doesn't just fill a room, but crawls under your skin and stays there. Steve Davies wasn't a man who believed in ghosts. But that night, the mansion felt like it was breathing. He was in the control room, sipping black coffee gone cold, scanning the perimeter feeds. Every camera flickered but stayed online, except one. The West Wing. Static. Always static. He'd tried resetting it a dozen times, swapping the feed, changing the angle, even replacing the camera itself. Nothing. It was like something inside the house didn't want to be seen. Around 3:07 a.m., he heard it, faint but clear. A whisper, low and melodic, like a lullaby sung by someone who had forgotten the words. He froze. The sound didn't come from the speakers. It came from behind the wall. He turned, heart thudding. The control room shared a partition with the west corridor. The sound seemed to bleed through, the same rhythmic cadences breathing, slow and unsteady. He pressed his ear to the wall. "Hello." No response. Then, softly, "Please help me." Steve jerked back. It wasn't his imagination. That was a voice. Human. Weak. Close. He grabbed his flashlight and followed the noise down the hall. The floorboards creaked beneath his boots, each step echoing in the suffocating silence. The mansion felt colder than usual, as if the temperature had dropped 10 degrees in minutes. When he reached the west corridor, the smell was there again, faint but unmistakable. Sweet, rotting, metallic. His eyes watered. The whispering continued, now from inside the wall itself. He ran his fingers along the wallpaper, tracing the seams. It was too thick, recently replaced. Then he noticed it, a section slightly raised, an outline beneath the pattern. A false panel. He pressed lightly. It gave way with a soft creak. Behind it, darkness. He aimed his flashlight through the gap. The beam caught dust swirling in the air and something else. A small opening leading to a narrow cavity between walls, barely large enough for a person to crawl through.